Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR tutorial series, where you learn by watching other VR, AR, and MR professionals create the magic. I'm Marcelo Lewin, an immersive technologies evangelist, creator, producer, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest creator today is Mary Poplin, an accomplished VFX artist and product specialist for Boris FX. Today, Mary will be showing us how to remove an object from a 360-degree video using Mocha Pro 2019. But before we get started, I want to remind you to register for free at howtocreatevr.com. Free registration gets you access to more video tutorials, assets, podcasts, interviews, ability to favorite, to comment, to create a watch list, plus much more. It's really quick and easy. Again, just visit howtocreatevr.com and click on the register for free button. All right, Mary, welcome to the tutorial series.
Hi, well, thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Known you for quite a while, and you guys always have done some really cool stuff. The last iteration of this application was called Mocha VR. Now it's Mocha Pro 2019, right?
Yes, that's correct. We rolled all of the Mocha VR tools into the newest version of Mocha Pro, so they're not separate and confusing pieces of software anymore. So basically all the modules from Mocha VR that you're used to, so like the equirectangular lens, the reorient module, and the ability to use the remove module in VR are all ported over to Mocha Pro 2019.
I see. Well, there may be times when I keep calling it Mocha VR, so forgive me and feel free to correct me.
No worries. Just call it Mocha.
Mocha, there you go. We'll just call it Mocha. Before we get started, why don't you expand a little bit on the intro I did of you, what your background, how did you get into VFX and working at Boris and all that?
I've been doing visual effects for well over a decade. I don't want to say how long because that's going to date me, but well over a decade. And I first started working on an animated movie down in Orange County, and that led to several other jobs. Eventually, I started doing roto paint work and then matte painting, and then more like roto paint and matte painting work, and then compositing, and then stereo compositing, and eventually that led to Mocha, mostly because I worked with a coworker who was like, hey, why aren't you using Mocha in this shot? He showed me how to. It literally took something that was taking me a day and a half to roto, like about 20 minutes to roto the shot, because they were all rigid bodies, and that's what Mocha does. You know, it sticks really well to planar surfaces. So we had the product manager from Mocha come by, it's Martin Brennan, that office, and he liked my work. He thought I was very well versed in Mocha, and he encouraged me to apply for the product specialist position, and I did. And the rest is history, and I've worked there for the last several years. I help make video content to educate other Mocha users, and I still do freelance on the side.
Now, you threw in a lot of terms in there as you were explaining your background. Maybe you can expand a little bit on, first of all, what is the specialty of Mocha, number one? What is roto? What is planar tracking? Just give us a little basics of that so everybody's on the same base level here.
Sure. I'm probably going to open Mocha to show you what planar tracking is, because it's better to have a visual to explain it. We're going to take a surface tool and we're going to turn that on. This is not a tutorial, but I want to talk about planes. All right. This ground plane is actually planar data. Okay. And what we mean by that is we mean pixels moving in one direction. So Mocha actually looks at pixels as they're moving together, and it judges that information not based on points or features, but on the texture itself. As you can see, we are not tracking points, features, X's, tape marks, nothing. All right. So when we say planar tracking, what we mean is tracking pixels that are moving the same. And we use that data in order to drive things like corner pins, transform data, and rotoscoping shapes, which rotoscoping is where you trace an object so that you can composite objects behind it or define objects so that you can add color corrections to them, or in this case, remove them from the scene. They're vector splines that follow tracking data.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, today what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove a piece of equipment right at the bottom. This is an equirectangular footage that you have full 360 degrees. And at the bottom, there is the camera or a dolly.
It's a rig. So if we look at the bottom at the nadir and see in Mocha, we can actually pan around to the nadir if we want to, actually as if we were standing inside the 3D space. What you can see here is if I turn off our overlays that we have this rig. Now, of course, the rig doesn't look perfect because this is the bottom of the solve. And when you stitch objects, obviously, it's not going to be a perfect stitch at the bottom because you're getting the very edges of what the camera can see. So that matters because we want to remove that data. So we're going to take that data and remove it in this shot by using a rotoshape to define the object we want to remove, and then using another rotoshape to track the planar data that moves behind it so that we can replace the pixels based on the motion of those pixels behind the object.
Right, and that's the key here that we're talking about, because I've done object removals using Photoshop, but that was on static shots, and that's a pretty simple thing. You shoot a clean plate, boom, you're done. But a moving shot, that's a totally different thing, and that's when you need an app like Mocha to come in and help you. So why don't I let you take over? If as I have questions, I'll jump in and just ask away.
So I'm going to close this real quick, and we're going to start from scratch because I kind of want to show you how to set up this shot. Now you can see that this says Mocha VR. That's because this is a legacy instance of the software. But notice if I launch it, it still launches right inside of the Mocha Pro plugin. That's the Mocha Pro 2019 plugin. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the Mocha Pro plugin. You can do that by going to Effects and Presets and typing in Mocha right here and dragging and dropping it onto your clip. Or you can go to Effect and you can go to Boris FX Mocha and you can select Mocha Pro, just like that. So either way is how you apply the effect. I'm going to delete one of these, and now let's talk about how we actually make this read our equirectangular footage. Because how we apply this data matters, and this is how we apply the data in our interface first. So what I need to do first is go to Views, and this is mono, but it is 360 mono. So we have to select 360. Now I can say, hey, let's undistort this with the lens tool and render it. And I can actually use this to view my footage in whatever view I like. Now I'm actually not going to do that because I don't need to do that for a remove, but I want to show you how you can just really jump in and start using this plugin right away. Now this is equirectangular footage. What I want you to notice as well is that we have a stitch line in our equirectangular footage. This is really common, but what you need to know is that if you have things like this, artifacts in your 360 stitch, you may get artifacts in your track. So when you apply Mocha to your footage, you want to make sure that you are using the cleanest stitch you could possibly have. Now that being said, if you have a bad stitch here and a bad stitch here, but a good stitch here and a good stitch here, what you can do is you can use Mocha to roto a good stitch area from a different solve and then feather that back into the shot. And what you can do is you can use that to solve some of your equirectangular issues. Now, then I'd want to render that because what you really don't want to do is tax After Effects too heavily. So we could render that and then apply Mocha again to it. I wouldn't pre-comp it just because once you start pre-comping like huge 360 pieces of footage inside of After Effects and just keep applying things to it, you're going to end up with a real significant performance hit, and that doesn't have anything really to do with After Effects or Mocha or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that these files are huge and we're asking the computer to do a lot of calculations at once.
Quick question. Regarding the performance, do you recommend if you're running Mocha that you have a GPU, and is there a minimum spec GPU that you recommend?
NVIDIA cards tend to be the ones that you want, newer NVIDIA cards. AMD is not as supported. All right, let's talk a little bit about removes and how they work. So we're going to take our Mocha Pro. We've already selected 360 mono, and we're going to launch Mocha. Now, once we launch Mocha, we're going to go to View, Nadir. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first frame, and I'm going to draw a shape right around my drone. Now, notice that when I draw my shape around my drone, I am not drawing a shape that looks like this. Okay? And the reason I'm not doing that is because we actually want to make sure that we get all of the shadow that moves beneath the drone, all of the warping that's happening on the ground. You see how this tightens into like a pinpoint? We want to make sure that we remove all of that when we are removing our drone, because that's garbage that I don't want in my shot. I want these clean pixels and these clean pixels to replace these, not warped, pulled to a point pixels. All right. We're going to call this Rover because it's important to name your layers, because that is a sanity check. You don't want to have a bunch of layers in your shot and not know what they do. And you certainly don't want to collaborate with other people and have your layers unnamed. They will not thank you for that. Now, we're going to take our rover and we're going to leave it in a large shape to encompass all of the errors that are around our rover, and we're going to draw a new shape right around our rover. So we're going to just take this and draw a new shape. Now, I don't mind drawing outside of the lines because when I draw outside of the lines, I'm not actually drawing, quote unquote, outside of the lines. I'm just drawing outside of my view area. That's important to think about because obviously if we unwrap this, you can see that my data is all right there. All right. So we're going to take our rover and we're going to drag it above or drag our BG track below the rover layer. Now, why do we do that? We do that because in Mocha, as long as you, the user, align your foreground roto shapes at the top of your layer pile and your background roto shapes underneath them, you will always have holdouts for every subsequent layer beneath that. Mocha holds every top layer out from every layer beneath. Now, from here, I am not going to track my rover. And the reason for that is, look, I don't need to track my rover because my rover is always in one spot because it's always at the very bottom of the nadir by necessity because that's what happens when you have a shot that's moving like this and you have a camera on top of a fixed point. That fixed point is always going to be at the bottom. So the thing I do have to track is I must track the background pixels that move behind the rover. But if we turn our mat on, you can see that I will only be tracking the pixels that move around the rover and not the pixels from the rover itself. This is important because these pixels need to be replaced by these pixels. So let's turn my surface tool on. The surface tool is how we tell what our tracking data is doing. We do not need to turn this surface tool on for Mocha. We need to turn this surface tool on for us, the user. We do this so that we can make sure our track looks good. Once I have aligned the surface tool to the ground, I can track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to just switch real quick to our Essentials mode. Essentials mode is new in Mocha Pro 2019, and the reason I want to do this is I just want to show you real quick what translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective mean. We've actually changed shear to skew in the newest version so that it makes a little bit more sense to people. Translation's really obvious, so if I have a little square like this, translation is going to be how that is moving in X and Y. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, no problem. Okay, scale, also obvious. All right, rotation, super obvious. We know exactly what that is. All right, but shear and perspective mess people up. So shear is just warping in X and Y. All right, and perspective is the addition of Z space to that warp. All right, so we want to track all of those for this ground plane. And the reason we want to track all of those for this ground plane is because we need to get an extremely accurate track to replace these pixels. I'm going to move back to our classic view real quick. And I also want to talk about two new tools that we added. They're not necessary for this remove, but I want you to know they exist. We have a new magnetic tool. What that does is that snaps to edges. So it helps you trace objects really quickly and easily, just like this. And it basically, it's looking for edge finding. So if you need to do a complex roto shape, you can use this tool.
It's like the Photoshop tool, right? And it's looking for that high contrast.
It would be like the Photoshop tool if it was a raster-based thing, but it's actually vector-based.
I see.
So, once we're done with that, I'm going to actually just escape out of that because I don't really want to finish this. But let's just go ahead and stop tracing. There we are. What we can do is we can follow this, automatically, but I don't really need to do that. And like I said, it is vector-based, not raster-based. The initial line that you make is raster-based, and then it actually converts to a spline. So we're going to also talk for 1 second about the freehand tool, which is like the tracing tool, except for it's literally you just draw. So freehand versus snapping. Not like Photoshop, but a little bit like Photoshop if you need to grasp the concept. So, all right. Tracking this background. we're going to align this surface tool. The reason we align the surface tool is because we want it to follow the ground plane and let us know how our track is looking. One more thing to point out. Link to track. We're going to link to track none. All right. So what that's going to do is that's going to read these pixels, and it's going to read them like a scanner. So every pixel that moves through this shape is going to be read, but the surface tool is going to follow this off screen. So if I hit track forward, and you can see this is tracking pretty fast, you can see my surface tool continues to move, and it's going to continue to move off screen down the edge, just like that, while my shape stays in place. And this really illustrates the difference between the surface tool and the shape tool, and it is really kind of confusing for new users. The shape is where the track is looking. The surface tool is what the track is doing. And if you try to trust the shape to tell you what the track is doing, you will be disappointed often, because the shape can be animated by you however you like, whereas the surface tool always follows the track. Unless you're using manual track, and that's a whole nother conversation. So I'm not going to make you sit through tracking this entire thing, but let's just go ahead and show you how this works.
Quick question before we jump in. How long would it normally take for tracking, let's say, this footage?
Well, we just tracked 100 frames, and it took about, 30 seconds?
Right.
So that's about how long it takes.
And I guess it also depends if it's 4K versus 8K. And
of course it does, and it depends on your machine.
Right,
I can't give you concrete numbers for how long it takes to track. What I can tell you is that it will take a half second a frame, something like that. That's not 100% accurate, but it can take third of a second or a half second to track per frame. So, if you're tracking a 3,000 frame shot, you can expect it to be a couple of minutes.
Go get your coffee.
I actually have objections to that. When you are tracking with Mocha, you actually do not want to go get a coffee while you're tracking. You want to watch your track. And the reason you want to watch your track is because you want to make sure nothing moves in front of it, no occlusions move over the top, no lighting changes happen over the top in a way that works like an occlusion. If you go get a coffee and come back, chances are your track is going to have tracked for 15 minutes unsupervised, and you might have bad tracking data. So do not set it and forget it. Watch what it's doing. Watch the surface tool. It's there to tell you where things are going wrong. If things go wrong, then you can troubleshoot, and you don't have to sit over and over and wait 15 more minutes to fix an issue that you could have spotted 30 seconds in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you do catch an issue and you stop the tracking, do you fix that and then continue from that point, or do you have to restart it all from the beginning again?
Fix it from whatever point. So let's say I had my track mess up right here and it wiggled weird. I could just say, hey, track only translation, scale, and rotation for those couple of frames. And then when I was done tracking those couple of frames, I could go back to shear and perspective and continue tracking.
And then continue, right? So you didn't waste all the tracking at the beginning. Got it.
No.
Perfect.
You can change the minimum percent of pixels used when you track. This is your accuracy when you track, right? What this does is This is you're tracking 20% of the pixels in this shape. Okay,
Yeah.
So it's only looking for 20% of these before it moves on to the next frame. Okay, it says, I believe that match is good enough, and moves on to the next frame. Now, if this were 100, it would wait till it found all 100%, and then it would move on. That being said, 20% is usually enough. Only if you find your track is slipping do you up this number, because this number, the higher this number is, the slower your track is. Same thing for your search area over here. If you find that your object is rotating really quickly, you can increase the angle percentage. What that will do is it will increase by degrees. You see there's a little degree sign there. So if you find it's rotating by 25 degrees every single frame, then yeah, you're going to want to up this angle, and that will increase your search area. Same thing for zoom. Zoom percentage. If it's zooming 200% every couple of frames, yeah, you want to increase this zoom percentage. It'll increase your search area, right, where your track is looking for this pattern of pixels. Now, the problem with that is, again, that takes longer, because the larger your search area, the more computation you're asking your computer to do.
Sure, that makes sense. Now, can you do that temporarily for the next 10 frames and then reduce it back?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
So these are animatable, this is animatable, these are animatable, this is animatable.
Perfect.
Once we are done with this, once we are done with our track, and we feel like that looks good, and I feel like that is locked to the ground, and I can even turn my grid tool on to really judge. I don't see that slipping at all, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use this data to replace this data. We do this very easily. We jump to our Remove tab. Now, in our Remove tab, I'm going to turn my overlays off here for a second, and my mats off. I'm going to say, hey, use all these pixels to replace these pixels. So to do that, I'm going to say, hey, use auto step. Now, step is how we can start to save ourselves time in our remove. We can look at every single frame for the entire range, and that's going to be a step of 1. Or we can use auto step to look at whatever frames Mocha thinks are necessary to use for the remove. That'll start to save you some serious time. You can also manually adjust this to look every 5 frames, every 10 frames, every 15 frames, etc. Your first frame and last frame is the length of the remove. In this case, we're only removing to like 1600. So, it's because we didn't track all 3000 frames. All right. So we're not going to use all 3000 frames. So we could actually make this down to like, 1650, right? Frames before and frames after. We could say, hey, no, only look 100 frames before and 100 frames after. Okay. And what that'll do is that will lessen my search range for my remove. If we have lighting changes, we can use linear illumination modeling, and what that will do is that will look at, let me turn my surface and grid tool off, and this background shape off, that will look at all of the pixels around this spline in hue, saturation, and value, and it will try to raise or lower the pixels inside of the spline in hue, saturation, and value to match. Interpolate will actually look at individual places along this spline, and then it will try to blend the hue, saturation, and value to match. Obviously, both of these are computationally expensive. Don't use them unless you need them. Use linear if you need to adjust lighting, and then if linear needs more nuance, use interpolate. Interpolate is going to be good for things like caustics, things like where you're going nearby a light, or where soft shadows are moving over your object. Please note that if hard shadows are moving over your object, you will need to remove the hard shadow, remove the object, and then rotoscope the shadow back over the top to put it in brand new. Interpolate cannot figure out hard-edged shadows and should not be able to. It's basically an occlusion. Does that make sense?
Completely. Sounds like a lot of work, though.
Yes. I actually have a mundane, like not 360 remove where I do that very thing, and it is a pain. Blend and randomize, you don't really need to use these. They're basically to blend edges if you're having edge problems, but they're also very computationally expensive, and for VR, I don't recommend that you use them. Same thing for 3D compensation. 3D compensation will try to use motion vectors to try to predict what 3D changes are happening under the object. Again, very computationally expensive for VR for a minimal payoff. Okay, flood fill is going to look at all these pixels around the area and then try to flood fill the middle. That's if you don't have anything at the bottom that you can use to replace, like if you don't have pixels before and after, and if you don't have a clean plate. Again, you will very rarely use that, and you don't really need to worry about smoothing level, again, for VR projects. So we're going to use auto step, frames before, frames after, first frame, last frame. What we can do is we can ask Mocha to render this. So I'm going to hit render. And we've done everything correctly. Mocha will remove the object. Okay. So let's look at that in our nadir and our 360. Let's turn off our overlays so we can really see.
That looks pretty cool. Now, quick question for you, because the ground forward and behind it, it seems like it's pretty easy to kind of bring into and replace the object. But what if this was cobblestones with squares, right? How would that work?
So I feel like you are mistaking this texture for easy. There is a lot of small detail here that needs to line up across the board, including pieces of tape,
True.
This like line here, the modeling of the asphalt itself, and the color. This works no different for cobblestones, bricks, or any other type of detail. Now, if you are removing over bricks, make sure when you are defining your shape that you make sure that you are encompassing the entire curve of what's happening to the cobblestones as we get towards the bottom. Otherwise, you will have a wonky remove. And that's because you want to make sure that you treat any pulling as part of the remove. All right, so that's how we do a remove, and then we're not going to render it all inside of Mocha. As you can see, it did not render all of these frames, and that's fine. We're going to hit File and Save Project and close this, and now inside of our plugin, our Mocha Pro 2019 plugin, we're going to render this right back to the After Effects timeline. So let's jump to the beginning of our shot, just like this. So we jump to the beginning of our shot, we say, hey, I want you to render the remove. So we check the Render checkbox, select Remove. And now, inside of After Effects, we'll render this back to our timeline and we can play it right back to our timeline.
That's some pretty amazing replacement there. I mean, like you said, yeah, I'm mistakenly, it seems like it's an easy thing, right? But obviously there's so much nuance on that ground, and including that piece of tape that's coming down there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's lining up.
Yeah.
It's not fracturing, right?
Right. And from this point on, you just continue on with After Effects like normal. Do whatever you need to do.
Yes, exactly. What I like about using the plugin is that when you use the plugin, it saves you a lot of time because you don't have to go back and forth with a bunch of renders. You can, you could apply a color correction on top of this and then hit render. Now, just know that the more effects that you apply inside of After Effects, the longer your render is going to be. Please also note that if you want to save this file externally, you would go to File, Export Project, and save this as a Mocha file. Okay. And that this Mocha file is not saved until you save your After Effects project. So make sure when you're working that you save your project, okay? Like you save Mocha and then save the project.
So that Mocha file that you saved, I can give to another editor that has the same footage and they can use it in their After Effects.
Absolutely, as long as they are using the exact same frame range, rate, size, aspect ratio, etc.
Right.
Yes.
That makes sense. Well, Mary, this was pretty awesome, actually. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time doing this tutorial. People want to get a hold of you. Do you want to give a URL or an email or a Twitter, whatever you like?
Yes. You can find us at borisfx.com.
So just go to Boris FX and then search for Mocha Pro and you'll find it there. Well, thanks again, Mary. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with us. Just a quick reminder, if you want more video tutorials just like this one, assets to practice with, podcast interviews, plus much more, make sure to visit howtocreatevr.com and click on the register for free button. If you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great VR, AR, and MR presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. So until the next episode, I'm Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.